Okay, shall we start? Welcome everyone. Welcome to Flutter Day today. Today we will host a Flutter Day at Melbourne with Flutter Melbourne, and our Flutter organizer Mark will show us how some of online tools can be used for trying Flutter out. He called it Zero Install Flutter, which is so cool. And there will be some interactive demo on how these tools work as well. I think this will be interesting for all range of Flutter experienced developers. So welcome, Mark. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Susie. Thanks, that was a fantastic intro. Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for coming along and joining us on this Flutter Day event. I'll be, like as Susie's mentioned, I'll be presenting some online tools that you can use to do some Flutter development with basically no installs required on your own machine. So feel free to also post any comments or questions you have in the chat, or in the YouTube chat, and I'll try and answer them as we go, or maybe just towards the end if I don't spot them at first. Also, Susie will be keeping an eye on them, and maybe we'll be able to answer one or two or prompt me if I miss one or two questions. So with that, I'll just switch over to the slides I have. So, went to the wrong one. So today I'd like to talk about the kind of tools you've got available now to use Flutter, or to develop with Flutter on the web without having to do the usual install. Because one thing I've noticed back when we had in-person meetups was that a lot of people struggled, especially when they were beginning, with just getting the basic tools installed on their machine, and often that's been one of the more difficult things to get people started, was actually just getting all the tools installed and correctly set up and working on their own machines. And until recently, it wasn't a great story about an alternative. Luckily now, basically in the last 10 months or so, we've had a number of tools become available that really have changed the situation and have given us a few different choices of doing Flutter development basically with nothing but a web browser on whatever machine you have to hand. So that's the kind of things I wanted to show you quickly today. This will just be sort of like a whirlwind tour. I won't spend too long on each one, but I just want to give you a sense of what each one is and what they do, the differences between them. And also I'll try and sort of go from the more beginner-orientated ones through to ones that might appeal more, well, they'll all appeal to beginners, but or newcomers to Flutter, but also some might be more useful for people who have a little bit more experience with Flutter as well. So not just for people just starting out. So the first tool I wanted to quickly show you is, I guess, the original Dartpad. And the nice thing with Dartpad is it was basically originally, as the name suggests, just for Dart. And as you can see, there's nothing Flutter specific about it. And originally that's all it was for Dart. But then last year, thanks to some awesome work by people on the Flutter team, it was expanded to work with Flutter. So what you can do is, if you just go to literally dartpad.dev, really simple URL, under the samples, what you'll find is not just pure Dart samples, which is the first few. For instance, the Fibonacci sequence, this is just pure Dart. And if you run it, there you go. This is just like you basically just get some text output. But under the samples, what you also find is these ones you see with the Flutter logo, and these are actually let you run Flutter code. So, for instance, this is the infamous counter app that you get when you first create a Flutter project using the installable Flutter SDK tools. So here is, nothing particularly amazing about it, but what is amazing about this in general is the fact that you're now running a Flutter app here in a window. So what's happening is that Dartpad is actually compiling the code here on the left into basically a Flutter web app, and it's running on the fly here for you every time you click run. Like you can see, if we say Flutter, we go Flutter Day homepage. We can just click run, and there you go. Like, it's updated. One thing you'll note is this, for those of you who are familiar with Flutter, this is not the hot reload experience. This is more a hot restart, because you can see, like, for instance, the state isn't preserved like you would get in if you're running the tools locally. And so this, for instance, the counter did reset. So every time, so you see, if we have a state of 7 and we make a change in the code, what you will see is that we will lose, unlike running it with hot reload, we don't get to keep the state, because essentially the app is being recompiled and redeployed on the fly for us. But still, what this means is you can essentially have a running Flutter app in mere seconds of opening a web browser, and you can try things out. So you can see there's more samples here for you to try out. There's things like a kind of simulation, if you like, or like a playground for being able to drag around and play with the physical and get a bit of physics as well. And the nice thing is, of course, all the source code is right here for you to have a look through. The next tool I wanted to show you was one that was introduced actually last year alongside Dartpad Flutter support as part of Flutter Interact, which was the Flutter Factory. And this is a interactive tutorial, if you like, which uses an embedded an embedded Dartpad to give you a series of tutorials, examples that you can work through step by step. So pretty much a code lab, as it were, but one that basically is running. So each one of these you see is an instance of the Flutter-enabled Dartpad, where you can test out the code, and you've got a number of steps that you can follow along, where it shows you different parts, like basically stepping through different variations of the code to teach you how to do different things. So this is well worth, if you're very new to Flutter, well worth trying out this Flutter Factory to get basically a small interactive tutorial of what it's like doing some work with a Flutter app. I'll just switch back. I've only got one screen with me today, so I just check back now and then to see if there are any like burning questions or comments. I don't think there's any so far, so I'll just keep tracking. But like, yeah, do please pop any questions or comments you have. Oh, so there is one I just spotted from Gary. It's about Dartpad being super useful to show something quickly, but yes, there's the imports are very restrictive. I'll get to that point in a sec, Gary. A little bit down the track, I actually have some things to talk about with that. So I'll put that on hold, and I'll come back to your question just in a little while. So, but it's an excellent point. The next example I had of an online tool is actually Dartpad again, but Dartpad with a wrinkle of null safety. So this is, I guess, a little bit more of an advanced topic for those of you who've been doing Flutter, or for those of you who may be coming from mobile development with Swift or Kotlin. You'd be used to the null safety features in those languages. And the exciting thing is that Dart now has a technical preview of their upcoming null safety feature for the language. So the great thing here is that for those of you who'd like, you can try it out now by downloading basically the master channel or the development channel. No, so I think it's, yeah, the development or master channel of the Dart SDK, not the Flutter, because it's not available yet for Flutter, and trying out the new null safe features. But for those of you who just want to give it a quick go, you can just use this null safety enabled Dartpad to try it out. So for instance, we can go here with, look at the snippets that they provide. So for instance, if we want to have a look at what nullable types are like, you can see it gives you an error because it's saying that int was not declared as nullable, but we have tried to assign it to one. So if we wanted to fix that, for instance, we could say A will be a nullable int, and wow, there we go. The error goes away. Also brought up the documentation for it. Or we could say, no, it definitely has to be a not nullable int. But then if we make sure we assign, say, 0 or anything to it, the error again goes away. And there's a whole bunch of really great little snippets that show you all the kind of aspects of null safety functionality that are coming to Dart. The late keyword will probably be again be familiar for people coming from Kotlin. And there's also lazy initialization as well. Well, anyway, I won't go into too many details. I won't spoil your fun, but yeah, just jump on nullsafety.dartpad.dev and check out all the examples and play around. Of course, like I showed you, all the code it's a live environment. You can just basically change the code, run it, and see for yourself what happens. Now, another really exciting tool that came along quite recently was the fact that the Flutter team worked with the people over at CodePen to bring support for Flutter to CodePen. So for those of you from a web development background or who may have done web development in the past, may have seen CodePen as like online playground for doing like HTML and CSS and JavaScript importantly. Well, now CodePen supports Flutter. So what you can do is you can actually head on over to CodePen, go to Editor Flutter, and basically very similar to Dartpad, you get support for running Flutter code inside. So here you go, inside this environment. The nice thing with CodePen is, of course, that you get a number of features that Dartpad doesn't have, that CodePen already has for its web development. They also come along here for you for your use with your Flutter apps. Like there's functionality to share your CodePens, to save them into projects, to organize them. So that's one thing that, like for instance, Dartpad doesn't have. Dartpad you can use with gists to essentially save something that you're working on and then open it in a particular gist in Dartpad, which actually I can show you later on, perhaps. But with CodePen, a lot of that kind of functionality is built in. You can save your CodePens, organize them into folders and projects. CodePen has also, I'm not spruiking this, CodePen have not paid me to advertise them, but like they have a pro plan which lets you then also do things like upload assets and get a few other pieces of functionality. I'll not here to spruik it, but I'll let you go to their website and check it out if you're interested in getting like a more featured experience for that as well. So that's like 3 of the tools, or I guess 2 tools, because Dartpad has a number of variations that I wanted to cover. One thing I wanted to do as part of this was I went along and tried to create like a little tiny app to try out each of these environments myself. So if I open it up for you here, I think if I open my one here. So this is a little app I wrote of all the countries I've visited, and all it does is you can check out the code later on if you like, but all it does is it just basically every time we run it or tap on it, it just randomizes the flags and then removes them one by one until we get to where we are today. So like I just wanted, I didn't, it's quite a simple little kind of toy app, but what I wanted to do by building it was to see what the experience was like in using each of these environments. So I did it in Dartpad. I also did it in CodePen. And you can see one of the cool things about all of these is that basically I just have a URL to each one, each tool that I built this in. And each time that's basically all you need is the URL, and you can send that to anyone who you want to show whatever demo or like app you've built using these tools. Excuse me. So yeah, I wanted to basically use as a kind of little illustration of the experience, if you like, of building an app in these tools. And what I wanted to say about building them in these apps is, honestly, I had to say I failed. So I actually tried my best, or up to a point, building that little app in Dartpad and in CodePen. And I have to admit, like about 2/3 of the way through, I ended up stopping, giving up, and switching over to Visual Studio Code and finishing off the app using Visual Studio Code and it running as a local Android app on my Chromebook. And then once I actually got it working, I switched back over to Dartpad and created a gist for it to be in Dartpad, then copy and paste it into CodePen. So the reason I'm telling you this is basically my next slide. And as wonderful as all these tools are, the thing is, there are limitations. It's not, there's really no such thing as a perfect tool, or even a tool that does everything for you. So by going to and using these tools where you don't need to install it, that's a brilliant thing. You don't need to install anything. You can send it to anyone else in the world with just a URL to show what your code is, not just what it is, like you would say with a gist or a GitHub, but actually show your work code working to anyone else that you want to collaborate with. What I wanted to, I guess, show that example is that there are limits to these tools at the moment. The first limit, as Gary very sagely predicted, was there are no package imports. So for those of you who are familiar with Flutter, like you probably saw in the code that I had a few imports. So I'll switch back. Switch back to, for instance, Dartpad. And you can see I, for instance, have imported Dart Async and Material. So there's basically the core Flutter and Dart packages are available, but essentially you can't pull in any imports as you would in your own apps by adding them to your pub spec and then making use of them in your code. So currently that's a limitation of both Dartpad and CodePen. Neither of them allow this, but fingers crossed that could change soon. There's an open issue at the moment, and our very own Flutter DevRel rep in Sydney, Brett, who I'm not sure whether he's with us today or not, I saw had commented that he may be working on this over the next little while. So we may, with a bit of luck, have that functionality for you, Gary, and everyone else sometime in the future. So it sounds like it will be actively worked on over the next little while, but we'll see how things go. As usual, without any timelines or predictions of when it will be available just yet. The reason I ended up switching to Visual Studio Code rather than using these online tools when I wanted to finish off my app was that at a couple of points I needed to check the layout of my app, of my widgets, and that's where like you can't really manage it with the online tools. And what I really wanted to use was the awesome dev tools that comes with the Flutter SDK when you install it locally on your machine, which allows you to do some really nice interactive debugging of your app in terms of your Flutter app, in terms of like the widget tree and how it's being laid out. So I really missed that tooling. And also another point I needed to, well, I didn't need to, but I really wanted to use the debugger to quickly check on the value of a variable as the app was running and set a breakpoint. And again, that was something that you could only get with the installed SDK experience. So that's two pretty big limitations. Once you start doing anything, I guess, a little bit more complicated, and especially if you're trying to do something quite tricky, those like tools are really helpful. And I have to say that it's quite a big it's a fair thing to miss them when you're using the online tools. So yeah, like once you start getting into slightly more complicated things, the way the tools are at the moment, you do need to switch over to the installed SDK. Another limitation, as some of you may have noticed, is there's only one file. And both Dartpad and CodePen, again, only let you support one file. This is not a huge limitation because I've seen people already doing files thousands of lines long, but as you can imagine, that is not a great experience. If you, I'll try and post some perhaps in our Australian New Zealand GDG Slack channel later on of some of the awesome examples people have built, especially in CodePen. Like there are literally some amazing apps that people have been publishing there, but they are like thousands of lines long, and it's probably not the easiest experience to do that with online tools. Like they do support some nice features, like for instance, there's auto formatting, so it keeps your code reasonably tidy, but it's really not the easiest experience editing a file that's a Flutter file that's thousands of lines long. What was my next point? So just again, like a bit short on window space. Yes, version control. This is something again that, like, if you're doing regular development, you really get used to having Git, which is basically the de facto version control tooling for development these days. And unfortunately, apart from being able to use GIST kind of with Dartpad, it's like a little bit clunky, that process. There's not really much in the way of version control support with these online tools. Also, for online tools, it's surprising that there's not really any real-time collaboration, although I did find out that CodePen Pro, which I have to admit I don't subscribe to, says it does have real-time collaboration features built in, so I haven't had a chance to play with them. So perhaps that's something that people who might want that would look at. But for instance, for Dartpad, there's not really any way to do online collaboration, real-time collaboration, which as a web tool, that would be kind of like a real big plus, because it feels like a natural environment for that to work happen in. What there is, though, is in Visual Studio Code, something you do have to install, ironically. There does seem to be quite an interesting real-time collaboration functionality built in. I played with it a little bit, and it seems to work quite well. So again, it's a bit strange that the online tools don't have it, but I'll touch on that in a second about why that may be. And also, I did find the error UI can be quite intrusive in CodePen. Like I can show you perhaps by switching over to CodePen. Like if I was to say make an error on purpose here, you can see like that UI just sort of like pops in and pops out in line, and then you get some more error UI. And I found this, like, especially in the larger file, it's very jarring. Yeah, like there you go. It's like they sort of just pop in and out in line. I can see why, in terms of UX, like this could be this is quite nice functionality, especially for a beginner, because it shows you kind of the errors right where they're happening. But also, I did find, especially with a larger CodePen, like for instance with my one, if I was to go somewhere in the middle here and say cause an error by deleting that, like you sort of get this weird kind of jarring error pop in and out as you're editing your file, which I could be a personal thing, but I just found it rather distracting. So, and I'll switch back to my slide. So that was one thing that I found a bit not so great. And I think one of the things that I found especially sort of jarring, as it were, coming from the installed SDK, was not having hot reload, which for me is a real killer feature of Flutter. And I understand technically why this is so in the web tools, but not having to go back to not having hot reload felt like sort of, almost having one hand tied behind my back. So this could be something that comes along in the future. It's just, I suspect this is more to do with my last point, and which covers a lot of the points I've already raised, which is the tools are fairly new, and so they are still very kind of immature. They haven't been around for very long, and it's not a criticism of the tools or their makers. It's just like the reality of life. It's to get nice tooling takes, like, I guess, nice wine takes time, and you need to just basically have the space to work on all those extra features and to hone the UX and the functionality of the tool. So I expect a lot of these critiques that I have may be irrelevant perhaps in a year's time, as the people working on CodePen and Dartpad get a chance to build out more functionality and improve the tooling. And like basically even perhaps add different types of functionality that we haven't seen yet in there, like installed SDK that might work better in an online environment. So that pretty much covers what I wanted to say in terms of the tools. I had one, I guess, kind of bonus, if I switch back to my previous slide, which was, it's really like talking about immature. This is a super new tool that one of the members of the community, Ray Davis, has built, which is essentially, for those of you who may have used like GUI builders in the past, it's basically a GUI builder for Flutter. It's still quite kind of raw, so I will try and, like, for instance, build some things here, like maybe if I do a floating action button, I can sort of put it there, and then if I click on it, I might be able to set it. What do I? Oh, actually, let's see. Can I make it blue? Or is that, no? Oh, I think I'm not doing the right thing. Oh. Oops. Widgets, entry outline, floating action bar. Yeah, maybe here we are. Yeah, like I said, let's see. Can I make it? Nope. Okay. Oh, well, demo fail for that particular one, but what I wanted to just show you was that there is tooling, not just from kind of the Flutter team and larger players like CodePen, but also people in the community are working on tooling. And the interesting thing is that app is actually available both on the App Store and Google Play. So the web version is just basically the same code base that he's built for mobile, working on the web. And from what I've heard, it's very straightforward to move your code base, apart from a few gotchas, which one of our great community members, Gary, has written about some of the gotchas that you can run into by moving mobile app code from Flutter app code from mobile to web and to desktop, actually. But for the most part, it works really well. So that's something I haven't worked on too much, but I'm really keen to try out, because this is one of the things that these web tools show, is just one of the beauties of the web is just how open and accessible it is to basically everyone, so that you don't need to install anything. You don't need to have a particular version of a particular operating system made by our friends at Apple, for instance, because the SDK only supports X versions of whatever tools you need. Basically, if you've got a reasonably new web browser, that's all you need to make use of these tools. It doesn't matter which operating system you're on or which even browser you're using to some extent. So having like the ability to build Flutter tools, so build Flutter apps for the web, and to create tooling using Flutter for Flutter, very Inception-like, I think is a really powerful thing. And I'm sure we're going to see more of it in the future. And of course, someone just mentioned the fact that there was an article that came out just, I think today or overnight, talking about the new Flutter dev tools having been rebuilt by the Flutter team using in Flutter. So now when you go to use the dev tools, or at least like, I think they might still be marked experimental, you'll actually be using a Flutter app to debug the widget tree, or say the network calls of your Flutter app that you're building. So building tools in the same framework and language that you're using is a really powerful concept, and I really like it. And it's definitely on my to-do list to try building some tooling using Flutter for Flutter itself. With that, I'll just check back to see if there were any other questions, because I'll be busy talking in a different window and looking at a different window, see if there's any things that people were asking that I may not have covered. Fabio was asking, sounds like there's useful for opening issues on GitHub with working code. Are these tools able to keep the code that we type for long term? Yes. So that's one thing I very briefly mentioned, like with Dartpad. If you look in the top right-hand corner of Dartpad, there's actually instructions on how to use a gist to then save a particular bit of code that you can then refer to the URL. So if I go back to my app, you can see like there's for those of you who are familiar with Git, something that looks like a hash, and that's actually a hash to a gist file that I made. So if you look under share, you'll actually go to the instructions on how to prepare a gist in the way that you can use with Dartpad. So yes, definitely with Dartpad, you can create a gist and then have a URL to that particular bit of code, Fabio. And then with CodePen, it's actually much simpler. You can just like essentially, oh, sorry, went to, they create these like little artful URLs for you to use. So, and then you just literally save, and you can then share that URL. I think you get it via, actually, I think you just get it every time you have, this URL actually points to the pen that you're working on. So yeah, I think in CodePen, it's even easier to share your creations around with whomever you want. Let me just double check. I think hopefully I've answered people's questions. There's been some great comments. Thank you everyone for leaving your comments. Oh yes, it talked about code completion. That's one thing I didn't mention. Like the tools do have code completion and documentation. They're really quite good. They're not, again, perfect, but they do certainly make life easier. So for instance, like if I was to come here and go, let me see, something like instead of builder, list view dot. Maybe I'll do it in Dartpad, but it hasn't. I'll just try, here we go. If I was to go here and go, oops. Oh, doesn't seem to be working for me. Strange, maybe because I've introduced errors. Let me just try the Dartpad. So if I just come here and do something like, there it is. So there you go. So that's the autocomplete there. And you can just try something like, there we go. So you get all that. So say if we want to set the alignment, you get the autocomplete for the alignment. So not sure what was going on. I'm pretty sure I've done the same thing in CodePen. I don't know why it wasn't working just then. Maybe it's because I've got the auto save turned on. So that might have been interfering with the code completion. Looks like there's another question. What makes CodePen a better option over Dartpad, or does it? I'd say they're quite, I guess, different use cases for each one. Like CodePen definitely is much more featureful. Like there's lots of features that CodePen already has that their Flutter support sort of got for free because it was already built into the CodePen tool. And I think that's the Flutter team said that's why they worked with CodePen, because they were thinking about extending Dartpad with lots of new features. And a lot of those features were already in CodePen, so it made much more sense for them to work with CodePen to get support for Flutter. So yeah, there's definitely lots more features in that you get with CodePen, especially around social aspects. But Dartpad also, I guess I find it useful because it works with gist. So if you want to have like the basic Git source control that you get with a gist, it's not quite as friendly as like a normal, well, actually they are normal Git repos, but they're a little bit trickier to work with. But if you want that sort of version control, then that's, for instance, something that you get with Dartpad that you don't get with CodePen. But mostly, I think CodePen is a more featured environment versus Dartpad. But for instance, Dartpad is being developed by the Flutter team, means that you get things like the null safety preview, which is kind of like, yes, hot off the presses functionality for like a very new version of Dartpad. Very new version of Dart. That while CodePen, I think, would be on a stable version of Flutter, say the Flutter channel. Stable Flutter channel may be beta, but it's definitely not the development one that you get with the null safety Dartpad. I wonder, actually, I think we can even see. Oh, here we go. Yeah, so we get Dart 284 in Dartpad. I'm not sure if we can see what version of Flutter or Dart that we get with. No, I don't think. Or at least I don't know. Maybe someone can tell me later on. There's a way to see what version there. You could just use like perhaps platform.version or something. But yeah, like it's quite possible that Dartpad would, for instance, have a newer version, or most likely it has a newer version than of the Data SDKs than CodePen does. So hopefully I've answered in that rambling answer. Hopefully I answered Matabar's question. Cool. Well, I think that's about all the time I have today. Thank you very much for everyone for coming along. I hope this gave you kind of like a little insight into the kind of tools that you have available just by opening up any web browser and going to a URL. And also, even if you don't want to perhaps develop in these tools, if you already have the SDK installed, it's a great way for sharing like code snippets or like small little demo apps or anything in between. I actually have done this myself recently, where an old colleague was looking for an example of a bit of code to do a specific bit of functionality, and I found actually a Stack Overflow answer that I pointed him at that kind of described what he wanted, but then I thought of a modification to that. So I quickly actually took the code from the Stack Overflow answer, changed it around a little bit, put it into a CodePen and sent it to him. And then he could see not just my code changes, but without installing anything, he could actually play around, like he literally just open a browser window and play around with the changes I'd made and see the app running in the window, which was really useful. So yeah, for that kind of like sharing and quick prototyping, I think these tools like are amazing, and they're really like a useful part of your arsenal to help with your Flutter development. So with that, again, I think I'll wrap up. Before I do, I will ask if everyone has a chance. I'll also post this in this URL into the chat. If people would be able to take just a couple of minutes or even less to fill out the feedback form, that would be super helpful for us to get your thoughts and feedback on this session and what perhaps you might like to see in future online events from Flutter Melbourne. I'd really appreciate it if you get a chance to fill that out. I'll just welcome back Susie to say any final words, and
Yeah,
if you like.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is really amazing presentation. And I did not know there are so many tools for beginner to start playing with Flutter. So hopefully with all this information, we can get more Flutter lover on the board.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks, Susie. And thank you very much for running the session today. It's a big help having someone else to do the event. So I really appreciate it. And yeah, thank you very much, everyone, for coming. And hopefully we'll see you all at another online event, or maybe in the future, even some physical events further down the track. Cool.
Yeah,
All
thank
right.
you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye. And
Bye.
thanks.